So directors, we're just starting the live stream.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. It's been a long while since our last hospital board meeting. So we do have a majority, or at least our quorum.
Oh, yes.
So we're good to go. And so first, we'll call the meeting of Thursday, September 17th, 2020 to order for the Comox Valley Campbell River Strathcona, or the Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District Board together. And we'll just like to welcome everyone back and to recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Comox First Nations, and thank to them for their gosh, it's one of those days. Just want to thank them for allowing us in on their traditional territory. And we have a full agenda. We're going to try and be finished and completed by noon. We have like to just welcome Scott and Shelley from Island Health, and who will be making a presentation a little later. So we have adoption of the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, we'll take it under business arising, then Director Lee. And anything further on adoption? Hearing none, any opposed? Hearing none, that's adopted. Business arising from minutes, I have Director Lee. Is there any other director with anything from the business arising? Okay, yeah, well, should they be muting themselves? Sorry, it's a first one with a different system. This is my fourth system. So.
Director Lee. Number 8. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the minutes of the last board meeting, our board made a motion to request that our pathology services be excluded from that VIPCC contract, and that our pathology service be reinstated at Campbell River and Courtenay North Island hospitals. I saw the letter that our chair wrote to follow the board's instructions on that, but I don't believe we've got any resolve to that issue. So I would move that we take our concerns, forward our concerns to the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition to request that North Island hospitals have their pathology services fully reinstated. And the reason our hospital board needs to be involved is that we borrowed $236 million to build the hospitals, which included pathology spaces and equipment. And they're, as far as I can see, being underutilized. And it's an abrogation of our contract to build those hospitals and have those services present. So I just want to say that I think we need to draw attention to this issue at a higher level. And so I'd make that motion that we take our concerns to the we copy our letter to the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition.
Hey, if I can, Director Lee, I'll just get confirmation, but my understanding is that's one of the topics that Island Health will be dealing with today, so it may be a little premature. So if you could hold it, I'll just check with Shelley Gallant.
I don't want to lose track of this
No, I
because
understand that, Director Lee. But if they're going to make a presentation to us today, including a response to the pathology letter that we wrote, then there's no sense making a motion right now. So if you could just hold on for a second and we'll get clarity from Shelley Grant. Shelley, are you there? Yeah, during her presentation. Shelley? I'm not sure that we have Shelley on.
I believe Shelley is online. Oh, I think
Hi,
she just,
can you hear me?
yep, she's loud and clear.
Are you going to
Okay.
be addressing, Shelley, are you going to be addressing the lab issue during your presentation?
At the end of our presentation, we do have a slide where we have the pathology as one of the other items that you had asked us to speak to. And I do have information from our Vice President of Medicine around pathology.
Okay, thank you. So Director Lee, I would suggest then that we hold your motion in advance.
okay.
And if you're
So
not,
would you put it under new business?
no, it'll come under part of the, I guess, right after that, after the number 2. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We can pop it under new business. That's probably the easiest. We'll put you down under new business, Director Lee.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything further under business arising? Seeing none.
I'd like to move the financial statements and auditor's report.
Thank you.
Second,
Okay. So moved by Director Greaves, seconded by
Director Evans.
and Director Frisch. So
And Mr. Chair and
Yep.
board members, Russell Dyson here. I'd just like to introduce Mariah Ford, who will give a presentation with respect to the financial statements. As well, she will introduce your auditor, MNP, Corey Vanderhorst, who is on the line to speak to the statements as well.
so do I.
Yeah, if you just press shift.
Great, thank you. And through the chair, thank you for having me today. So I'm going to do a brief PowerPoint to you summarizing the financial statements. And typically you would receive these in the spring. However, due to COVID and meeting delays, we're looking at in the fall. So this is really wrapping up last year's financial statements and also a good opportunity for us to consider or receive feedback from you when we build the financial plan coming up here for 2021. Thank you. So just to give a highlight of this service area, the big focus on this service has been the North Island Hospital projects for Campbell River and Courtney. So those were completed, I believe, in 2017. And we have transferred $90 million of long-term debt. We did that in 2018 over a 10-year term at a 3.2% rate. So just to note, the short-term debt we had on this project was $101 million, and the debt term was originally planned for 20 years. However, strong reserves and low interest rates allowed us to reduce and pay off some of that debt and also reduce the term. So we left us in a very good position. The annual debt servicing, which is locked in for the 10 years until 2028, is $10.7 million. 7.8 is to principal, 2.9 million is to interest. The budgeted annual grants with this service, so outside of, the big project, which was the hospital which is completed, is a budget of $1.88 million per year. So that's an allocation that we have with Island Health. However, just to note, the average we've been spending or providing out of this budget is averaging $500,000 over the last 5 years, so anywhere from $400,000 to $800,000. So typically our actual activities and our allocations are quite a lot lower. The allocation or requisition has been $17 million for many years, building up to these big projects. So now with the debt payments known, essentially we're transferring $5 million a year into reserves for the service. Next slide. So at a high level, the statement of financial position, we have grown from $12 million of assets in 2018 up to $19 million in 2019. The large allocation within that is just the cash balance. So as we transfer more money to reserves, that's what you're seeing with that asset balance. On the liability side, we went from 91 million, which was that long-term borrowing for the hospital, and we paid off principal this year in 2019. So we are down to 83 million, and you'll continue to see that balance decrease over time. So the accumulated deficit, that's in a negative position, but you can see the deficit going from 78 to 63 million is decreasing, and essentially you'll start to see that swing. So as we start to accumulate more reserve money and pay off debt, our financial position starts to swing in the positive direction. Next slide. Thank you. So our statement of operations, which is our revenues and expense in the service, we're holding at our $17 million, 2018. And the core of that is that requisition of $17 million. And we receive some grants in lieu from some of our federal provincial properties within our area, as well as interest revenue. So our reserves are earning interest for us. And our expenses, you see that decrease from 8.4 million down to 3 million. And the decrease you're seeing is 2018 had that one of the last final payments of 5 million for those large projects for the hospital. 3.2 million in 2019 included our debt interest of 2.9 million. We have some administration support services allocations of 300,000. And then our grants to Island Health for kind of regular activity was 175,000. That's compared to that 1.88 million I spoke of. So again, you can see typically we're trending lower than that budget. So our surplus is that $14 million. And just note the way we present our financial statements, this is just sort of operational activity, which includes interest, but that annual surplus is allocated to debt principal at $7.9 million and also reserve transfers. So that's sort of where that surplus goes to. Next slide. I wanted to provide a bit of a picture of sort of what our outlook is changing. We've been leading up to this large project for quite a few years and leading into larger payments for debt principal and interest and longer terms and whatnot. So just as we go into financial planning, a consideration for the board is this is sort of where we've been and where we're going right now with the current plan. So you can see that 17 million of requisition is, at this point holding on for the long term. You can see your grants. You had that peak in 2018 when you paid that last piece of the hospital projects. We had quite a low balance of that 175 in 2019, and then we have that 1.88 we're budgeting in the future. So unless we have sort of other priorities or larger projects come up, those are holding at a lower balance. Debt interest is holding at that $2.9 million. We'll be paying that until 2028, and then the graph doesn't show, but it falls off in 2029. Debt principal also remains static at $7.9 million and falls off in 2029. So as you can see, reserves we're holding at that excess 5 million, which is left over of the 17. And then you see that peak in 2029, essentially, unless we have other plans or purposes. But as that debt interest and debt principal falls off, currently the plan would be we would put more money into reserves. So next slide. So what does that look like for us in our overall financial position? As I spoke to, you're going to see that shift. So that purple line is our debt balance. So you're seeing we're paying that off. And as of 2028, we're paid off. And then our reserves, the path we're currently on as we continue to increase that reserve balance, they actually intersect around 2023, 2024, around that 40 million mark. And then we continue to increase our reserve balance And that spike in 2028, unless there's other identified purposes, we go up to 105 million of reserves by 2029. So just something to keep in mind as we think about the service and long range planning, what do we want to see with the service, and where do we want to use these funds, and how do we maximize this available funding within the service? So something to keep in mind as we think ahead. Next slide. So as a summary, I'm looking for you if you have any questions on the financial statements as presented, and also too, if you have any considerations or thought for us as we go into building a financial plan package for you for November.
So how do I turn on?
I'll show you the list here.
Okay.
Director Walliams first.
Yes, Director Wally, and I have Director Wally and then Grieve.
Thank you,
Director
Mr. Chair.
Wally.
I wonder if we could have a copy of that presentation emailed out to us. The figures would be nice to have on hand.
I think that can be arranged.
Thank you.
Director Grieve and then Cole Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. My question is, where are the reserves currently parked? I must have missed that. Do we have it in an MFA saving?
Through the chair to Director Greaves, that's correct. So we're holding the reserves within an MFA pooled interest fund.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the report. It's encouraging to see our reserves in a very healthy place at this point, and then only increasing. I'm just wondering what it's sort of a typical reserve level would be that we'd want to sustain, just so we can have an idea about how we want to be managing our requisitions in years coming up.
Thank you through the chair to Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I'd really like to take a look at for the CVRD over the next year or so, is really taking a look and developing wholesome reserve policies for the hospital district with solid waste and CVRD board. And just really taking a look at, what do we need for reserve? What are we going to use them for? What's their purpose? What sort of balances are healthy? And I think part of that is our kind of long-term goals with each of the service areas. And as organizations, there is sort of some balances we want to have. Some areas might have a bit more risk in operations, so we might want to have a bit more reserves to kind of mitigate those risks financially, whereas other reserves or other services, are quite static, and there's sort of some known things, and we have a lot of control over sort of what those expenditures look like. For hospital, my understanding is the board here has quite a bit of say of sort of what sort of service areas they might want to venture into and kind of what those expenditures look like. And I think my understanding is that any sort of investment or significant investment into projects would be a collaborative process with Island Health. So we would definitely have a part to play in that. So rather than, they're sticking to our 1.88 million as a sort of a top end, what we're seeing that typically spend is quite lower and the needs are quite lower. So, I would say our risk is low in the service for potential unknown expenditures. So I think it's really about this board strategic view of kind of what do you want to see in the service? And I think that's the key question that we need to maybe explore a little bit as we look ahead and determine where funding levels should be at.
Okay, great. And I think as a background for that discussion, having a reserve policy as the type you're developing sounds like an excellent sort of foundational piece. So thanks for putting that together. Look forward to seeing that. Thanks, Mariah.
Okay. And I have Director Arbor. Lee? Oh, I see.
Dr. Lee, thank you. Mariah, I thought through the chair to our financial manager, I thought that I heard you say that the $14 million surplus from 2019, 7 million of it was applied to our 91 million or to our debt level on the new hospitals to reduce to the principal to reduce our payments over the long run. And before we start taking on any more debt or major projects, I think that in the economic circumstances we're going to find ourselves in over possibly the next decade, we should be looking at getting rid of that debt ASAP. And if we have surpluses or if we have the ability to take reserves and pay down that debt, I think we should do that, because I don't think interest rates are going to stay low forever. I'm really worried about the ability of our tax base to maintain, high levels of hospital taxation when we're heading into some rocky economic times. So I know the Hospital Act does not allow us to go beyond funding the 2 major hospitals and the 5 or 6 clinics in our area. And until the Hospital Act changed, then we're not mandated to do that. And I don't think we should do that. And the board's voted a couple times not to do that, but not to enter into the long-term care funding with the province. So
Director Lee,
we did that already.
appreciate your comments, Director Lee. That's the purpose of our strategic planning session, which now was supposed to be held this fall, which is now scheduled for sometime in the spring. And it's the board will be going through where do we go from here, and we'll do that in partnership and consultation with Island Health and the provincial government. So I think that whole concept is good. That's the direction the board has chosen to take. We'll do our strategic session and everyone can have it. And thank you very much.
Yeah. But I just wanted to close by saying that I really appreciate our finance manager addressing the pay down of the principal on that debt that we took out. I think that's going to be crucial to unload that debt in the near future. So thank you.
What I want to do. You know what? Yeah. Oh, okay. Director Grief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the CAO to staff. Just for clarity, my understanding is this was a bond issue and there is absolutely no advantage to paying it off early. It's due in 10 years. The interest rates don't go up. So this isn't like, a car payment or sort of bank loan. It's a little different. So there is absolutely no advantage to paying this debt off earlier. There will be no change in the interest rate and it's fixed. So am I correct in that? Okay. Yeah, we need to get that clear here.
She's empty 24.
I can respond just to make it easier, more efficient. And yes, you are correct.
Okay. Mariah, do you want to hit your button? Thanks. Thank you. That's easier. Okay, any further discussion on the presentation by staff on our financial report? Anything from out in the cyber world? Wiz? Okay. Then we'll ask our next person, which is Corey from Myers, Norris and Penny, our auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me okay?
Move to receive the finance manager's report.
We did.
Okay.
Yeah, good. I'm waiting.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll keep my comments short. Thank you, Mariah, for the presentation. Good job going through those the financials there. Our audit is finished. We wrapped up in the spring, and really sort of a no news is good news type of scenario on the audit front. Nothing to bring to the board's attention. We are satisfied that the financial statements are not materially misstated, so that is a clean audit opinion. And thank you to your staff for all the time and attention to help us put together the audit. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are from the directors.
Hey, any questions for the auditor from the board? Not seeing anything. So we'll move along. So I just wanted to say thank you for the graph. I think that's really important. It's a nice visual way to see the financial data. So we have some time before the project is paid off to do our strategic planning and figure out where we're going to go in the future. So thank you. On the
Move
question-
recommendation.
It's already done.
Oh, we're all
On
good?
receipt. Yes, yes, we're on receipt. So it would be, I'm going to call a question, and if there's no further discussion. So is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, call that one confirmed. Approved. And there's a recommendation. Moved by Director Lee, seconded by Director Cole Hamilton, that the financial statements of the Comox-Strathcona Regional Hospital District for the year ended December 31st, 2019 be approved. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Any opposed? Not hearing any in opposition. That motion passes. So we go to number 2, the North Island Hospital projects, and we have Shelley Gallant, Executive Director for Geography Area 1. Dr. Jennifer Grace, and I'm not sure if Jennifer's online. Don't think so. She's the Executive Medical Director for GO1.
Jennifer didn't get the invite, so I'm just about to send it to her. See if she can join us.
Okay, that would be good. And is Scott there, McCartan?
Hi, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Okay, good. And Chris Sullivan, I know you were there earlier. Good to see you again, Chris.
Thank you, Chair.
So, pardon me? We haven't had it yet, but that's okay. We'll turn the presentation over to, or at least the control over to the North Island Hospitals to Island Health. So they're presenting information concerning the North Island Hospitals and other Island Health initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great, thank you. It's been a while since we met, so I'll just reintroduce myself to everybody. I'm Scott McCartan. I'm the Corporate Director of Capital Management and Finance Projects. So my portfolio includes all capital planning and leasing, capital finance and treasury, and major capital projects. With me today, I've got Chris Sullivan. He's a member of my team in capital planning and leasing, and obviously you know Shelley. So if we can just move on to the next slide. Just by way of an agenda, because the Hospital District Act and our relationship is primarily focused on capital, I'll be providing an overview of programs and services as it relates to capital needs, some challenges and risks that we are encountering as it relates to capital. Going to be talking a little bit about an opportunity that we have to invest some capital in additional long-term care. And then I'll turn it over to Shelley to talk a little bit about some of the operational questions that the board had. Next slide, please. So in terms of our programs and where we invest our capital, you're well aware that we have the 2 new facilities in Comox and Campbell River, and very appreciative of your contribution to those facilities. I'll just add here that there was a comment in the previous presentation around the fact that we're not spending the full $1.88 million that is allocated for equipment and such. And the crux of that is we have these 2 brand new or very close to new facilities, and there's not a ton of equipment or renovations that are required within those facilities at this time. Most of our capital needs are actually out in the community. So that's part of the reason why we aren't spending all of the money that's available to us. But that's not to say that we won't need it. A lot of the equipment, the MRIs, the CTs, the lab analyzers, have a 8 to 10 year lifespan. So in 4 to 6 years, we're going to see a big bolus of need of investment in those 2 acute care hospitals. So certainly we'll need that funding in future. Other programs that require a lot of capital, obviously long-term care. So we provide long-term care and complex care. We have 2 large capital investments on the go in Comox, one at Oceanfront Village, which is a 120-bed facility scheduled to be completed in 2021. And another one, which is a partnership with Providence Health, or the new Providence Residential Care Society at the Views, which is a 155-bed facility slated to be completed in 2023. We also have a lot of primary care needs within the community that require capital investment. We are becoming more and more involved in primary care networks or primary care centers, and those require space and equipment. And then also community care. We provide a lot of care to patients in their homes and in the community, public health, mental health, et cetera. And all of those require space and equipment in the community for us to deliver those services. So next slide. So in terms of the challenges and risks related to capital in those areas, I'm sure everybody's aware our acute care hospitals are often over capacity. And I'll talk about it later, but much of that overcapacity is driven by the fact that we don't have the services in the community that we need, including long-term care. So we could absolutely build more hospital beds, but that's not going to solve the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is that we don't have enough long-term care beds. So to the next point, if we increase investment in long-term care facilities, we will ease pressure on our acute care sites and provide more appropriate and actually cost-effective care, because it's far more cost-effective to have somebody in a long-term care facility than in an acute care bed. In terms of primary care, as I mentioned, we're standing up primary care networks and urgent primary care centers, which require capital investment. And in community, we're increasing our home support hours, which requires more workers. Those workers need space to reside, so making investments in community. In addition, we are making investments in mental health substance use facilities and other community services, which require capital. So if we move on to the next slide. But really want to focus the information sharing on this opportunity that we have for incremental long-term care capacity. So we know across the island and across the province that additional long-term care capacity is needed. We've struggled in recent years to keep up with long-term care demand because we've had challenges accessing capital. Long-term care facilities are very expensive to build. And we've also had challenges with operating allocations to run those facilities. But central government, Ministry of Health, in our most recent budget letter has indicated that there is a sizable envelope of funds for investment in new long-term care facilities across the province. So we have an opportunity to build new facilities, but we also have an opportunity to partner with our RHD counterparts in various communities to build robust business cases for these long-term care facilities. And just by way of a background on process, in order for us to access those funds, we have to complete a business case that will be submitted to the Ministry of Health and ultimately Treasury Board for decision on whether to fund our long-term care priorities. And because the demand is far outpacing what capacity we could build, it doesn't really matter where we build these things. We could build them in any one of our communities and they would be filled tomorrow. So it's our opinion that when these business cases go, and we're drawing up business cases for every single one of our communities, when these business cases go to Ministry and ultimately Treasury Board, they're going to look very closely at the economics of the business case. And if there's one business case that is, let's say, $100 million facility in Nanaimo and another one that's a $100 million facility in Victoria, and the RHD in Victoria is willing to contribute 40%, then Treasury Board will only have to contribute 60% or $60 million versus $100 million in Nanaimo. They're likely going to prioritize the one in Victoria. So we're presenting this as an opportunity to our RHD partners to more quickly advance those long-term care facility builds in their communities if they're interested in cost sharing. Next slide. So this is just some background on why we need more beds, long-term care beds. The main driver of long-term care bed use is our population over 75. And I think we all know we've got a growing and aging population. But the population over 75 is the fastest growing tranche of all of our age groups. It's expected to double over the next 15 years, and that's going to drive significant demand in long-term care. And if we don't have the capacity to meet it, it's then going to drive capacity issues in our hospitals. Next slide. We also have capacity issues. So on the island, our current capacity for long-term care is about 5,400 beds. That doesn't mean a lot unless you put a denominator to it. So what we do is we take the number of beds and we divide it by the population over 75 to come up with a metric called the beds per thousand population over 75. And our current capacity on the island is about 63.5 beds per thousand population over 75. By comparison, BC is 68 beds per thousand population. One of our counterparts, our closest comparator in the province, Interior, is 79.2. So we're already very behind. And as you can see in the graph on the left, as population grows and we don't invest, the long-term care beds per thousand population continues to decline. So we need to make investment just to keep up with population growth. And we also need to make investment to get to at least the BC average, if not higher. And for this board's comparison, if we look at the beds per thousand population in the North Island, I believe it's around 56. So Island Health is behind BC and the North Island is behind the rest of Island Health. So we know that there's a need for investment in the North Island, but like I said, we're behind everywhere. So there's a need for investment in all of our communities. Next slide. One of the other reasons that we need more long-term care beds is because the lack of long-term care beds, as I mentioned before, is placing a significant strain on our hospitals. ALC means alternate level of care, and these are patients that are in a hospital bed that don't need to be in a hospital bed. They could be adequately cared for somewhere else. And most of these patients could be or should be in long-term care. And as you can see on the graph on the left, our ALC census, the number of ALC patients in our hospitals, has been steadily growing over the last 6 or 7 years. Just to give you some local context, over the last year, the North Island Hospital's ALC rate, so the percentage of the beds that were occupied by an ALC patient, ranged from 17 to 33%. So at its worst, a third of the hospital beds in the hospital were being occupied by somebody that should have been in long-term care. So that equates for the 2 North Island hospitals to between 50 and 80 beds that we could free up by investing in long-term care. Next slide, please. So building long-term care beds is one way to address the issue. We're also working on additional supports to keep patients at home. So increasing home support hours, new programs to keep patients at home, and increasing supports within the hospital to better enable our discharge of patients to home. But really, as illustrated in the previous slides, those are going to be stopgap measures. We need more long-term care beds to really address the problem. Next slide. So how many more long-term care beds do we need? So we've done some modeling to understand what that need might look like. And the metrics that we use to understand what that need might look like are the long-term average length of stay, which is the graph on the left. So that's just the length of time that an individual on average spends in long-term care. That gives us an idea of our capacity as it relates to the number of beds. And as you can see, the Campbell River and Comox regions are, close to the Island Health average. It's not bad. So we don't have an average length of stay issue, as it were, in the North Island, although we would like to see all of those numbers decrease by having people stay at home longer before they come into long-term care. The real challenge in the North Island, and especially in Campbell River, is the assessed awaiting placement rate. So an assessed awaiting placement patient is somebody who needs long-term care, but isn't in long-term care yet. So we've assessed them and said, yeah, you should be in long-term care, but we don't have a bed for you yet. And the rate in Campbell River is 55 versus an island health average of 35. So that's 35% higher than the rest of the island. So certainly we have more demand in the Campbell River region than the rest of the island. And then the last thing we looked at is number of beds. So in the North Island, we have 256 beds in Campbell River, 515 in Comox, and 31 in the Mount Waddington region. So about 800 beds total. And as I mentioned before, per 1,000 population, that translates into about 56 beds per 1,000 population. So that has sort of, we've translated that into number of beds needed. And we're estimating that we need somewhere around 150 beds, incremental beds in the North Island. But across the island, we're going to need closer to 800 to 1,000 beds. So we have needs in all of these communities, but we're here to talk to you today about the opportunity in the North Island. So next slide. Oh, actually, you can go back. That's the end of my piece of the presentation. I'll just reiterate again that next steps for us, and we've been actively working on this for the last 6 or 8 months, is to create a business case for all of these communities and submit that to Treasury Board. Within that business case, our hope is that we will have some indication of whether the RHDs are interested in cost sharing on those projects. And it's our hope that if the RHDs are interested in cost sharing, that it will advance those areas sooner. We do know that certainly in the South Island, the RHD down there is very much interested in cost sharing in long-term care. We have good indications from the RHD in Nanaimo and good indications from the RHD in the Comox Valley. So I appreciate that your board needs to go through a strategic planning exercise to understand whether this is something that is of interest to you. And we're happy to provide you with whatever information you need to help make that decision. But just want to reiterate that investing in long-term care will help the acute care sites. And also just clarify that the Hospital District Act does not preclude investment in community sites. The Hospital District Act solely requires that the facility that's invested in is designated as a health facility by the Minister of Health. And we have been successful in many other communities in getting not only long-term care facilities, but also community health centers, primary care centers, and a variety of other services that we provide in the community designated under the Act, which has enabled those regional districts to cost share. So there is an opportunity if you guys are interested in partnering with us, and we would be happy to have you do that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shelley because she has some updates for you on more operational items.
Yeah,
unless there are any questions.
Just before you go away, Scott, we have a speaking list. I've got Director Frisch.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Scott, for the presentation. Those numbers are definitely informative, and yeah, I wasn't quite aware of what the need was. And I'll also just preface that I might be a little sensitive to this issue. I'm a little disheartened to hear that this is becoming quickly a municipal responsibility, and maybe you can clarify that. I was under the understanding that we had agreed to fund hospital capital, and now we're looking at long-term care. I'm wondering what other healthcare facilities the province would be happy to partner with us on, and that's a little tongue-in-cheek you might get. Our method of taxation is almost completely unfair, and it pales in comparison to the province's ability to tax in a fair manner. So I don't know if you have any comments about that, but I'm a little unhappy.
That's fair, and we're not suggesting that this is something that the board needs to or has to do. It's per the Act. It is completely at your discretion whether or not this is something you might be interested in. We're just presenting it as an opportunity to potentially advance a project in your communities more quickly than it otherwise may. As I mentioned, other RHDs have been interested in cost sharing on these projects. So, but absolutely appreciate that every district is different, and you're completely at liberty to make that decision.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying is that if we are a rich enough community to afford it, then we can build more long-term healthcare beds. Is that correct?
No, I think what I'm saying is that if you are able to cost share in the projects, there's opportunity for them to advance more quickly than they otherwise may advance. There are a lot of communities that don't have regional hospital districts at all. And so they will have to complete their business cases assuming no contribution from a regional district. And so it really varies from district to district.
Anyway, thank you, Scott. And I have a speakers list now. I have Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious with, in light of what's been happening with COVID really hitting our aging population, and also some of the movement to having better aging at home supports, why we're not looking more at providing those supports. I mean, you mentioned that some of the people that are in the hospital really could do okay, it sounds like, if they had the proper supports at home. I know certainly in my family group, the aging folks are not willing to leave their home, and they're especially concerned now when they hear of so many deaths in long-term care facilities. And it would be interesting to know what the stats are for COVID deaths related to folks who are aging at home and getting supports at home compared to in facilities. So I guess I'm just wondering, you know, why there's still this direction to create long-term care beds and facilities rather than putting more supports into helping people at home who often, you know, don't have a ton of health issues but need some support and could do very well at home. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, that's a great question. I'll just clarify. We are making those investments. There is significant investment being made in home supports and innovative programs, virtual care to keep people at home. The bed numbers that we're projecting are assuming that we are able to decrease that the long-term care average length of stay from 33 months to 18 months. So we are assuming that we're able to cut that length of stay in half by keeping people at home. But even with that, we still need 800 beds on the island. So we're taking a multi-pronged approach. Our preference is to keep people at home, but even if we do that incredibly well, there's still a massive need for new long-term care.
Okay, thank you. And could you respond to the piece about COVID, whether there's any...
If we can, Director Morin, I've got a very long speakers list following you.
Actually, it was part of my question about the COVID
I'm sorry,
aspect.
I can't speak to that. I don't have an answer to that. I don't think it's something that, well, certainly from a capital perspective that we've been investigating. Shelley, I don't know if you have any information on that.
On the deaths?
Yeah.
No, just in terms of whether there's a change in direction due to the large number of COVID deaths in facilities.
So on Island Health, we haven't had any outbreaks or deaths in facilities. We need to have long-term care beds, and we need to support people in their homes, because some people's care needs become beyond what we can actually manage in their home. And those are the people that require the services of long-term care. So it's like a stepped approach. Some people are able to stay in their homes, and we can provide the type of care they need in their homes right up until they pass away. Other people, their conditions, they have complexities, et cetera, that create care needs that are beyond what we would be able to do in the home, and they need equipment, and you can think of some long-term care is like a higher level of care than what you would get in your home. So it's like we need to have both to create the system of care that's required to support aging in the community, and not using acute care beds in hospitals that are needed for surgeries and medical conditions and other medical issues that require the services of that acute facility. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, there's.
We're going to move along. I've got a big speaking list, and I want to get to that. The next speaker is Director Cole Hamilton, followed by Abram, Adams, Anderson, and Lee. Director Cole Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Scott, for the presentation. I guess I wanted to find out, given that we have an average of 56 beds in the North Island per 1,000, and the provincial average is 68. If we are seeking to achieve the provincial average, I was wondering if you could just do the math for us on how many beds. You said 800 for the island in total. What portion of that total would be attributable to the North Island if we wanted to reach the BC average? And I just wanted to briefly say, echoing what Director first said, and I realize this is not policy that you set, but the idea that communities with more funding can literally move themselves up in priority is troubling. And to hear that there are other communities which don't have regional hospital boards and are even worse off than us, I don't think brings any solace here, sadly. But it's an observation, and I'll leave it at that on that point. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't tell you exactly how many beds it would require to bring us up to the provincial average, but certainly we can do that math and get it to you in fairly short order. What we have projected is that the need in the North Island is 2 large facilities between 150 and 200 beds each. So we're looking, 3 to 350 beds that we think are needed in the North Island.
Okay, thank you. Director Abram. You're on, Jim, are you?
Can you hear me?
About 4 different times. Do you want to use your phone, Jim? Unmute him and see. You're muted on the phone and you're muted on your mic.
Okay, I'm now unmuted on my phone.
You've got two machines working at the same time, Jim, which gives us feedback, and we can't basically reverberator.
Okay, so
we're getting horrible feedback. Try again. You're muted on the 1.
Mute, right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that works well.
Sorry, I just, technology. So, Mr. Chair, I think maybe you're going to have to answer this, or one of the other board members that's been around for a while. When we were fighting for 2 new hospitals, we had agreements with the CEO of the Island Health at the time, Harold Waldner, that there would be long-term care beds in place prior to the opening of the 2 new hospitals. I believe the number for Campbell River was around 40. I don't remember the number for the Comox Valley. So my first question is, were those numbers realized at the time prior to the hospital's opening? Does anybody know that answer?
I'm not sure if Scott does or Shelley. Yes, there was a requirement to build or to provide 40 new beds in the Campbell River area. My understanding is those new beds were provided. And yeah, but that's an operational issue. Jim, if we want, we can talk later, or is that your only question?
Well, no, that certainly isn't. I think there's a very fine line here between operational and capital. And we're now being sort of pushed over into the operational area with what we're being asked to do here. And I am totally in agreement with Director Frisch about the downloading of this particular situation and the fact that we don't have the resources. And basically the province has the tax base that we don't have and should be dealing with this and not coming to us with a situation where, you know, if you want these beds, we'll be glad to do them for you if you partner with us.
If I can, Director Abram. They have not asked us for a contribution or asked us to provide any beds. And currently some of the beds is a deal in Comox Valley, as an example, is with Providence Healthcare. What they're saying is, here's the opportunity. It will be up to this board to choose what projects we go into and which ones we don't. And that will be after our strategic planning section or session. And so the decision is ours, and they're just saying here, this is the challenges that they're facing and some of the issues that are facing our communities. But the decision as to whether we go one way or another way, or we do or don't, will be the decision of the board following our strategic meeting.
Absolutely. I understand that, Mr. Chair, but what I'm saying is that we're being offered a decision. This is like, you know, would you rather die by hanging or injection? That's not really a viable request. I mean, I'm being exaggerating here, but I'm just saying that we're being asked, or we're being told that if in the future we would like to have more long-term care beds in our community, it is our decision, and we will make the decision as to whether or not we will help fund them. Right. And I do not believe that we should have to. And you're not letting me finish my statement. If we are being asked to do that, and we basically were in negotiations for hospitals that were undersized to start with, and a promise of long-term care beds that went along with that undersizing, that was part of the deal. We will undersize your hospitals, but we'll give you more long-term care beds. If you recall, if you were there, if you were back there, you were, Andy was there. There were others that were there. So I still haven't heard from the Comox Valley people. Did they get their long-term care beds that they were promised prior to the hospital opening? And I still believe that, you know, we are crossing that fine line here between operational and capital by doing it this way. And yes, we will have the opportunity. Our strategic planning session is not going to happen, and you know it. It was on TV yesterday, Adrian Dix, the minister that we're talking about here, saying,
thank you, Director Grieve, Director Abram. We're going way off topic, and I've got other speakers on the list. So please wrap up succinctly, and I'll move to Director Adams. Director Adams.
I'm done.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Scott. With my 30+ years working at Island Health before and GBHS, couldn't agree more with the numbers that you're presenting as far as the over occupancy in the acute care facilities being tied up by long-term care patients that would be better served elsewhere. and that needs to be addressed. What has been continually asked over the past 10 years, if not more, is for additional long-term care beds in the Campbell River and Comox Valley area as our population continues to age. And that has not been met. So we have seen 100% funding go to the Parksville-Qualicum area, the Greater Victoria area, the Cowichan Valley area. And I'm sorry, but I agree with the Director Frisch that I'm somewhat disturbed and a little bit offended that you are now suggesting if we don't pay to play, then funding is going to go to those areas that are going to partner. When there has been a lack of contribution on behalf of the ministry and the provincial government to meet the needs in the North Island for over a decade. And I certainly appreciate the intent that there's only so much money to go around, and partnerships are always a good thing, which is what we have done with the ministry for acute care services, for equipment and everything else. But I'm sorry, I really am struggling with what the suggestion that you are putting forward. And I hope we can do better than that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll clarify, and that's a very good point and question. I'll clarify. Investment in Campbell River for new long-term care beds is Island Health's #1 priority community. So when we submit our business case to the Ministry of Health, that is going to be the first business case that we submit, and it's the community in which we want to see investment. So I'm certainly not saying that if the CSRHD isn't willing to cost share, that we're not going to prioritize Campbell River as a community to invest in long-term care beds. What I am saying is that when we submit that business case, we will also be submitting business cases for Nanaimo, for Cowichan, for Victoria, for a number of other communities. And the decision about which of those to fund is not necessarily up to us. So the better the case we can make for our #1 priority, the more likely it is that Treasury Board will decide to fund it. And I'm simply suggesting that there's an opportunity for this board to participate as a partner in that submission as a way to make that submission more appealing to Treasury Board. So I hope folks haven't misunderstood me to say that if this board isn't willing to cost share, that Campbell River will not, or Comox will not be a priority for Island Health. It's absolutely not what we're saying.
Okay. Chair, if I can quickly respond. Thank you, Scott, for that that clarification, because it appeared to be implied that if we were not stepping up, we would probably not be considered. So
no,
we'll continue to lobby and work with you and partner with you. So thank you, Scott, and thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you, Director Adams. Director Anderson, next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Scott, for your time. I do share, and I won't go into it all, but I do share the concerns by others, and I understand that you're not saying if we don't fund, we don't get consideration. However, that is actually part of what's happening, perhaps from Island Health, but in the province, and that is a real concern. However, given that that's what we're in, this board is then going to be faced with the perhaps shortened time frame to make such a decision about whether we're going to enter into this realm of care. So my question to you is, do you have any sense of timeline on this? Would you be putting together for your submission to Treasury Board a proposal for what we generally consider to be a long-term care facility in the city of Campbell River, or would you be submitting more community-based, perhaps creative solutions in some of the outlying rural communities, or both? I'm certainly interested, like Cortez, for example, we just purchased some land that can house exactly this kind of thing. There's a lot of interest in the community in creating a space that has some palliative care, that has some seniors aging in place, has some hospice support, but there's also, beyond the capital, all kinds of ways that we can be supporting families to keep. I've just done 8 years with my father and died him at home. So with a little bit of community support and really proactive island health support tied into a community kind of hospice, palliative care, long-term care facility, you might get really significant cost efficiencies. So I'm wondering if you're considering that for any of the outlying communities, assuming that you're driving these proposals and then potentially bringing them to us for contributions or not. How do you choose in the region how to choose communities and projects, and how can perhaps us as individual directors, perhaps not as a hospital board, work with you on that?
So to answer your first question, we are targeting end of calendar year to have business cases done. We'll probably bleed a little bit into 2021. To answer your second question, absolutely, we're considering co-location of multiple different service lines within these developments, not just long-term care, but other supports that can help the community keep people healthy in the community rather than coming into these facilities. Your question around the smaller communities, so the program have done their analysis of where the highest need is, and generally it's in the larger centers. But we have had similar questions from, for example, Tofino, and we've been investigating opportunities to, when we redevelop smaller community sites, to add some capacity for what you've just mentioned, rather than building a new facility, because then you get the sort of economies of scale and scope with the services at that site. So for example, we know we need to replace the Tofino General Hospital sometime within the next 10 years. And when we do that, we will likely look at building some long-term care or respite services in co-location with that new facility, so that we get those economies of scale and scope, rather than building a standalone facility that might not be as economical to run. So I can't speak for the program in terms of why they made the decisions about where to invest, but I can certainly commit to getting back to them to understand what their plans are for your smaller communities.
I would appreciate that, because certainly some of the pressure in these larger centers comes from the rural regions. I certainly know lots of Cortez residents who are and have been in long-term care beds in Campbell River. So I'd really appreciate being able to work with you and find opportunities in our remote communities where there is land and organizations and matching funding capacity.
And
so I'm just, my final point would be what I'm really hearing in terms of timeline is, if we are not willing to do our strategic planning until the spring, we're completely missing out on the possibility that Scott's putting on the table. I just want to make that really clear to the board if we're not willing to meet to the spring and you're working on it.
It doesn't preclude us, Director Anderson. That's making an assumption. They're talking about only the business case. No submissions to Treasury, no commitment on funding in 2021.
So Scott, could you walk?
I will move on to Director Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment, Scott, I have a lot of experience with long-term care. My mother died on December 19th, 2019, after spending 6 years in a long-term care home. While she was in there, I was totally supportive of her. That's why she lived for 6 years in that home. Basically, the people in those homes only can live for about 2 years because of the conditions. I would first like to say that I agree with all of the other speakers who have said that we're opposed to taking on the investment in long-term care. We cannot take this burden on to our local property tax owners. We can't afford it. Island Health First needs to stop talking about people that are in acute care as being just bed blockers who need to be moved out and put into long-term care facilities. Until the government brings in senior standards of care in those long-term care facilities, and Island Health mandates the way they're supposed to operate, so that we're not just looking at offloading seniors from the hospitals to facilities that don't have the capacity to deal with the complex needs of the people that are in there. The long-term care facility that my mother was in was one of the 40 beds allocated before the hospitals were built. That was one of the 40 long-term care beds that were allocated. It took a few years to build them, and then they sat empty for, most of them sat empty for a couple of years because the facility is run by a private owner, and they don't, all they are looking at. So I need to know that you're not just looking at people in the hospitals as being moved into long-term care facilities, and you don't have a plan to support the seniors when they get into those facilities, because honestly, they're hellholes and I wouldn't want to be in them. And you can see what's happened during the pandemic. People are dying in droves in those facilities because there's only like 5 people who have any medical training. There's 1 nurse per 150
Point of
people.
order. Point of order.
I'm asking, why doesn't Island Health and the government address the standards of care for long-term care facilities before they ask anyone to put
Okay,
more
Director
people
Lee,
into
your
them?
question has been asked. Give them a chance to answer, and then we're moving on to the next speaker.
Thank you. To answer your question, yes, we are moving towards more hours per patient day within long-term care facilities. It's been a huge focus of investment for the last number of years. Again, I'm not a program leader, so I can't speak to exactly what's being done, but I can tell you that significantly more investment has been made operationally. We're here to talk about the capital investment needed. So maybe I'll defer to Shelley if she has anything to add.
It's a good segue into the next part, which is the presentation on the second part of theirs, which is from Shelley. Go on. So Shelley, can we turn it over to you?
Sure, and Dr. Jen Grace has joined us. She's on the phone and she's going to try to unmute herself because the pathology issue she can speak to probably better than I can. Hang on. Jen, can you, are you there?
I'm on.
Which one is she? Okay. You want to try it again, Jennifer?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So do you want me to speak specifically to pathology now, or?
That was one of the items, yes.
Okay.
I think we've gone through the capital requirements through the presentation from Scott, and there was a number of operational issues: ophthalmology, pathology, psychiatry, cafeteria services that we're just looking for an update on.
Okay. So Jen, if you could speak pathology and ophthalmology, that would be great, and then we can speak to the other 2.
Sure. So I don't have a clear framework in my mind of specific questions around pathology, but what I can do is sort of kind of give you a little bit of an overview, because pathology in particular has been a very active forum right now in the region. So, so Charlie, before I sort of go, was there a specific question that the board had for me around pathology so I can make sure that I answer it efficiently?
Yes, I think the letter was clear in terms of the board's questions regarding pathology and the contracting of the service to VIPCC and what that meant to the current staffing levels at both hospitals.
Okay, so I can speak more to the clinical things, and I apologize, Charlie, but that letter was never forwarded to me, so I wasn't given that background, although I had reached out for it. So the physicians work in interesting ways, and so one of the things, like just and the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of physicians become professional corporations. So I myself am a professional corporation. The VPC is a form of professional corporation among physicians, but it's not a corporation how you would see, say, for example, Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's not that kind of a corporation. They're not usually for profit. They're usually a way of dealing with taxes and dealing with processes. So the VPCC contract was sort of a professional corporation that was set up in Victoria. My understanding was that the government, we were looking at changing some contracts, but the government in part mandates to us when we're allowed to renegotiate contracts and when we have to roll them over again, meaning that we just have to renew them as they're written. So that was the case for the VPCC contract. One of the things that I want to highlight for the group, because I think sometimes people misunderstand what clinical pathology is that as a practicing physician, I practice internal medicine, I work in the ICU environment, I work in private practice. My specialty relies heavily on laboratory investigations. That's what I do is I order tests and I write prescriptions. That's my practice. I'm not a surgeon, but I do occasionally need the results of what we call anatomical pathology. So what clinical pathology is essentially the specialized interpretation of what we call blood smears. Medical microbiology, which has become very complex over time because instead of, for example, anybody who did science in high school, we used to plate out like you'd get something that we thought was contaminated with bacteria. We would grow it on different kinds of media. The type of media that the bacteria grew on would dictate to us what the bacteria type was. Now we use genetic markers for bacteria. So it's not so much of the plating out as it is looking for little genetic information. So that service devolved to Victoria for the reasons I just described, which is to run a genetic microbiology lab where you can do that kind of testing is highly specialized. The other type of clinical pathology is the interpretation of bone marrow biopsies. And again, hematology has taken on can you still hear me, I hope? The interpretation of blood and bone marrow has also gotten very complex over time. And a lot of times it's hematopathology, which are specialized pathologists who do these interpretations because again, we're using a lot more genetic markers, things like what we call flow cytometry, and different kinds of things so that we can appropriately diagnose different genetic problems that can occur with the bone marrow that may be related to cancer, may be related to underlying genetic diseases, et cetera. So as a clinician working in the hospitals, my work, I don't actually interface directly with pathologists. Like I might have to call someone on the telephone if I thought, for example, a blood smear was a little bit, like I was worried a patient had leukemia or I was worried that a patient had another kind of underlying blood problem that can happen in the context of sepsis or things like that. But when I need to speak with a pathologist, probably 95% of the time, I need to speak with a highly specialized pathologist because my questions are extremely complex and often require special testing of blood that's beyond the scope of our lab in terms of what resources we have available to make that happen. So the regular blood work that I order, that happens business as usual. So the issue around clinical pathology, my own bias because of my specialized pattern of practice is that when I need to speak with a pathologist about clinical issues, I need to speak with a specialized pathologist because the information I need is a lot more complex than what, in my opinion, a general pathologist could provide reliably. And I don't have time to be slowed down when I'm looking after my patients. I've heard on occasion that there's been concern from some doctors. I think I've heard on one occasion Peter Olson be upset that we can't do local gram stains looking for infections, say, for example, with patients with meningitis. So the actual pattern of practice for those of us who care for those patients directly is that if we think somebody has an infection that's serious and compromising their blood pressures or compromising their potential outcome, the reality is when we do blood cultures, notoriously, although they're wonderful when they're positive, i.e. we can grow a specific bug and know how to tailor our antibiotics, we can't rely on that for whether or not we treat patients with antibiotics. And the reason for that is that we don't always get the bacteria in the sample that we've drawn. So we call that a false negative. So we treat patients. So if somebody comes in and they're sick, I draw my cultures. It's the first thing I do. I make sure the lab gets there right away so that I can start my cocktail of antibiotics, which is very broad, to hit all the bad players that I know are going to get my patient into trouble quickly, and deal with it. So me being able to get a gram stain, it would be nice and it's interesting, but it really doesn't impact how I treat my patient. I have to treat all my patients the same, and that's with kid gloves and to make sure that I've done everything in my power to ensure that we get people through a crisis, and that means broad spectrum initially. So the issue around clinical pathology that we spend a lot of time talking about, and we've invested a lot of time and energy in meetings discussing, is I'm just going to tell you as a clinician, the only thing that's impacting my ability to take really good care is that we've created some bad blood between the subspecialty pathologists and our local pathologists, so it makes it harder for me to talk to the people I need to talk to. So that's just calling it out and being as plain as possible, and maybe saying something that not everybody should agree that I'm saying, but as a clinician and my colleagues would sort of echo the same thing. One of the concerns we do have is that pathologists, like many specialists, are in short order, and 2 pathologists have recently retired from the Comox Valley. We're actively recruiting, and there's some very good folks on the horizon. We're looking to recruit what we call anatomic pathologists. So these are pathologists who specialize in looking at surgical specimens. The big problem we're having with turnaround times lies primarily with the fact that there's a national shortage of technicians, and the technicians are the people that take the surgical specimen and turn it into a slide that a pathologist can read. We're not able to do this locally, mostly because of shortages of, we can't do it in Campbell River, and this is mostly because of shortages of technicians. So our specimens are processed in Nanaimo, and then they come back to Campbell River. There's, multiple daily trips of specimens that travel south and then return. We're sort of at the mercy of technologist availability on that front, and then the local pathologists read those, and then where necessary, there are times that we reach out by telephone to the pathologist to discuss these results, and these results really do need to be timely, and I think we're always following and hoping for the best turnaround times that we can have. And I know that when you can do things, the same way all the time, you develop efficiencies. It can make your job a little boring, but it creates efficiencies and improves safety. So, having them processed in a large lab where they're geared up and they have a sustainable workforce really helps with turnaround times. So I hope that this information helps you a little bit with understanding pathology. What I can say as a clinician is that all the stuff that, we hear about with pathology, it really doesn't impact my ability to be a doctor and take really good care of patients in my hospital. We know that the lab processes the blood specimens as the lab does. We're doing our very best and working with our colleagues, to sort of help ensure that we have a sustainable lab. But I can say that the conflict that pathology seems to have generated within the community and even within the hospital to some degree does add an added burden of stress to all of us that I really question if we really need. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to answer any other questions people might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Grace. Director Kerr and then Director Cole Hamilton. Director Kerr, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I was going to hold my question for Charlotte. Okay. So if she's coming up, I'll just put me in line.
Okay, thank you. So Director Cole Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for that explanation of some of your perspective on pathology. I guess I'm wondering, it seems that your perspective was that given the expertise of specialized pathologists versus the general pathologists and the efficiency and volume, that it would seem that it probably didn't, there was never a strong case for having general pathologists on site in both hospitals based upon your perspective. I'm wondering, is that what I should be drawing from your comments, that the access to specialized people who do the same work in large labs over and over again is preferable, and it's what you would ideally like to see?
Hi, thank you for that question. I think that having local pathologists is extremely important. I think it helps maintain some quality. In terms of general pathologists versus subspecialized pathologists, I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that as times change and as the technology improves, that things start to fall out of our area of expertise. And we've all sort of been faced with that reality I'm a general internist. I'm not, a subspecialist in a given area. And I have to acknowledge where my limitations lie because of rapid changes in medicine. And there are some, there's a lot of things that are easy to manage, but I think in the area of lab, where we really rely on very technological equipment and technological specimen preparation and so on, unless we're doing large volumes of it, we can't maintain the equipment or the cost of the equipment. And I think as well, as the science gets more sophisticated, it becomes more and more difficult as a single person being the end all be all and everything. So I think it would be safe to say that, I think we have to acknowledge that times are changing and that subspecialists in certain areas are a better way to go to optimize care and resources. The thing with pathologists is that they don't need to be present to like, they're not a doctor that necessarily interfaces directly with a patient. Some pathologists do bone marrow biopsies, so there would be that interface, but to actually interpret results, you don't have to be in the same room, in the same vicinity or anything to provide the excellent service. So pathology is unique. Radiology is a little bit like that too, where, the radiologist can read scans electronically from anywhere in the world. There are a number of hands-on procedures that radiologists perform for us in an interventional radiology capacity, like, for example, putting tubes in chests or biopsying a liver or a kidney. And then the radiologist needs to be there to do the actual procedure, but the interpretation, not so much. So I think pathology is a little bit the same that way, at least as a hands-on doctor. That's how I interface with my pathology colleagues, is that I would at most talk to them on the telephone.
I have a really quick follow-up, if I may. I'm obviously not a doctor, but I find it difficult to square what you're saying with the fact that obviously pathology labs are put into both hospitals and paid for, and that was clearly the advice at the time that they were required. I'm trying to understand whether perhaps the practice has changed so dramatically since that time that it now is of less utility. I'm trying to square what you're saying with the very clear decision that was made to fund pathology labs in both hospitals.
So I'll give you a slightly different perspective very briefly, which is, I think that there is value in having a pathologist in the lab working with a technologist, so that when they bump up against something that's unusual or interesting and they need a pathology physician input to sort of redirect how they're doing something, I think the pathologist being present in the lab around those kind of operations is very important. But pathologists don't necessarily have to be in person with other physicians. They need to be in person, I think, for some aspects of the processing of specimens and working directly with their staff. So that's where I think there's utility of having pathologists in hospitals and in hospital labs. But if you, right, so that.
Okay, thanks. And I have Director Morin on the speakers list.
Great, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the for some of the clarification. I guess I would tag on a little bit to Director Cole Hamilton's comments about the expectation of having the full services here. And I know there's been comments made around how general pathologists actually, although they're not specializing, they actually may have more knowledge in other areas because they do have a generalist approach. And I know many other aspects of healthcare is going to a generalist, sort of having a good knowledge across the spectrum. So I guess, you know, it's the actual pathologists who are and the lab folks who are actually saying that they disagree, the people on the ground working in terms of the practice. So I guess I'm wondering what you have to say about the aspect of general pathologists potentially being able to cover more areas because a specialist may not be available in a particular area. General pathologists may have more knowledge than the specialist that's available. And I have heard that the lab folks, that there are good outcomes and better outcomes perhaps in having that pathologist in-house. And I guess the final question is, where are things at with the services right now? I understand there's a vacancy in the Comox Valley Hospital. So that would be my other question. Thanks.
So those are two good questions. So I think I would need to understand the question better. I would need a better example to understand where general pathologists might have more strength than a subspecialty pathologist, because pathology is a little bit different as a specialty than, say, being a generalist practitioner who actually physically sees a patient and needs to prescribe medication to a patient and needs to understand that, for example, if you have heart problems and kidney problems together, that you need to adjust medications to make sure you don't upset one organ system favoring another. In pathology, because it's more about interpreting a very specific specimen, like, for example, you look at a surgical specimen, you decide, is there cancer there? If there's cancer there, is it of the carcinoma or the sarcoma or the other category, etc.? It isn't really from a generalist perspective, except for maybe when you're looking for metastatic cancer and making sure that the anatomic pathologist isn't so specialized that, for example, this anatomic pathologist only looks at spleens and this anatomic pathologist only looks at ovaries. But my understanding is that's not, so those anatomic pathologists in some ways are already kind of generalists in that they look at all the different organs so that they could, which helps them if, for example, they were looking at a tumor and they were also trying to figure out where that tumor may have started, because the organ it's living in now may have some of the features of that organ, but also has features of the organ that sent the cancer there to start with. And I hope that that makes sense. So I think that, you know, the way pathologists are now, you're still having that generalist flavor. I can't think of a situation when a general pathologist would be better at interpreting a blood smear or a bone marrow biopsy than a hematopathologist. I can't think of a clinical example for that, but perhaps I'm missing that.
Okay. Okay, I have Director Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Grace, for your perspective. What our hospital board is concerned about is not so much the operational issues that, you know, the hands-on medical response at the hospital. It's that we built the 2 pathology labs with money that we borrowed and we fit them to size to accommodate those hospitals. And it seems like we no sooner get them built and Island Health starts allowing our service to be downgraded and moving technologists out of Campbell River and moving them so that, and having 2 pathologists leave in the Comox Valley so that we cannot effectively use the space that we paid for. That's more of our issue because we don't interfere with operational issues, medical issues. I do know though that I know, you're a special, you're fairly specialized. So when I go to the hospital, the most recent trip was I needed to know what was infecting my skin. This summer I had a skin infection and lab and urine tests in the hospital. They put me on antibiotic drip right away. And it was what?
I was just going to suggest the question.
Okay, so maybe you should get a copy of our chair's letter to Island Health and to know that our concerns are about our investment in our hospitals and keeping those services available.
We'll make sure that Director Grace gets a copy.
Yeah, because I think that us having to decide medical issues, that's not we're not qualified to do that.
No.
I'll just add, Charlie. Sorry, it's I just want to reassure you that it's not Island Health intention of not having local pathology services, and trust me that Island Health is as distressed as anybody else about the importance of recruiting replacement pathologists to the area and continuing to grow the lab in a way that makes it sustainable. So I think perhaps like there may be some misunderstanding on that front. That is, as a clinician, I wouldn't want that. And as an Island Health representative, we certainly don't want that. So we are working for recruitment, and the issues with pathologists leaving is highly complex and not for this table.
Right. We still have other issues. I think we've only dealt with pathology so far, and we still have ophthalmology, psychiatry, and the cafeteria services. Those are all up and running now and being run by Island Health, I believe. Am I correct?
Yes, Chair, you are correct.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. And so we can cross that one off the list. Ophthalmology was an item that came up over the summer from a former ophthalmologist in the Comox Valley who felt there was two ophthalmologists that were going to be retiring in the Comox Valley. And it was an opportunity, or he saw as an opportunity to sort of look at ophthalmology and should there be an ophthalmologist stationed in Campbell River. So that was the background behind that one. And then psychiatry staffing levels was an issue that arose this summer to make sure that we had capacity at both hospitals. One hospital, 2 campus model, that the staffing levels for psychiatric were sufficient to meet the needs of our combined service area of the 2 campuses. So hopefully that puts things into perspective. Can we have something on the ophthalmology and then psych?
Shelley, are you able to talk to?
Yeah, Jen, do you want to do ophthalmology? I can do psych.
Sure. I just love standing at the podium. So ophthalmology, again, another complex specialized area. I did read the letter that was forwarded to us from a member of the community. I did take the time to speak with the ophthalmology team for the GEO on the issue, just to let people know that when people are known to be retiring because it's difficult to recruit these subspecialists, that oftentimes, the one spot in particular is already got a person that will be coming into the spot, and they get posted and recruited long before they actually start, just so that there isn't a gap in service. The other thing is ophthalmology, like many other things, it is a regional service in the GEO. Traditionally, that service, the surgical side of it, has been in the Comox Valley. Like other, highly specialized surgical programs, it requires very specialized equipment that's very expensive. That equipment lives in the Comox Valley. There are ophthalmologists that do visit both Campbell River and a site in Mount Waddington to provide ophthalmology services. When they are taking referrals from family doctors and other physicians for ophthalmology, everybody's treated equally, in that it is regional and that people are seen based on urgency and need. The ophthalmologists in the Comox Valley provide a very good service to the hospital, and my understanding, to the community, in the sense that I've even had an ophthalmologist from the Comox Valley come to the Campbell River Hospital to look at a patient who needed assessment, who wasn't safe to transfer by ambulance for assessment to the Comox Valley. So for the service to be successful and seamless, particularly in the acute care setting for emergencies, you really need a very tight-knit, collaborative group of ophthalmologists that cover one another after hours. It would be very challenging, I think, to have some living and practicing in one community versus another, because of the travel to the equipment you need to ply your trade. So basically to have access to your toolbox. I think that sort of is a summary. And we did send a letter to Mayor Adams, who, we'd be happy for him to share that with the board if it was helpful.
Thank you. Now then, that leaves psychiatry.
Okay, so we have 5 general adult psychiatrists that provide service to Comox and Campbell River. We have 1 general adult jury psychiatrist that's on mat leave, so they do both seniors and adult. That psychiatrist will be coming back in March, so that will give us 6. There's 1 part-time psychiatrist leaving, but another full-time psychiatrist coming on in November, so that gives us an additional psychiatry. We have 2 child youth psychiatrists and 2 geri psychiatrists that only specialize in those populations, and they serve Campbell River, Comox Valley, and the North Island. So we are staffed in psychiatry very well.
Okay, do we have sufficient beds?
Our psychiatry beds are managed on a regional basis, so it goes by priority demand. So we try to keep the North Island patients in North Island at Comox, and so we're always doing work around what we call patient flow, and ensuring that we have services in community and acute, so that we can get the patients matched to the beds or the service that they need in a timely way. So that's ongoing, always work, but yes.
So we're not shortage of any beds in psychiatry?
Well, we have overcapacity situations where sometimes we'll have a couple of people that need a bed. But on average, when we look at it on average, we have enough beds to meet the demand.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Now, Director Kerr, you had previously been asked to be put on the list.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Shelley and Scott and Jennifer, for your presentation. A bit of a change of direction from what we've been discussing so far, but bringing it back to root causes. We've acknowledged that Aboriginal people have better health outcomes in First Nation-centered service approach. Also that women do better in a female-friendly healthcare environment, and the same for children and other groups. So right now we're in the middle of an opioid crisis where the death toll is 75 to 80% male, and the numbers approaching 100,000 or 10,000 deaths in Canada. We've got high suicide rates. 75% of the deaths are male. and men experience also high rates of homelessness, depression, mental health, cardiovascular disease, workplace death, and also we're seeing now a high percentage of COVID deaths. So my question is, has consideration been given to the development of male-friendly healthcare services in Island Health, such as specialized men's health clinics?
Okay, thank you. Who wants to answer this one?
I can, the Comox Valley, at the Comox Valley Nursing Center, we actually do have a men's clinic. We have not had the conversations in Campbell River or North Island yet. And as far as for the entire island, I can bring it forward to a regional meeting to see what our mental health and substance use team is working on.
Okay.
Thank you, Shelley. And I certainly think Campbell River would be a great candidate for such a clinic. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions of our delegations?
I have a question regarding mental health issues.
Okay, Martin. Sorry, Director
Sure.
Davis.
Yeah, either way, that's good. My question is regarding mental health issues. I've seen a couple of situations where people with chronic mental health issues have been taken out of the community and then released back into the community quite quickly without any apparent long-term treatment. I know we had somebody that was apprehended by police a little while ago, taken out of town because they're basically scaring the tourists. They're being really disruptive. And they were back in the community within days with no apparent signs of treatment. I know this person had gone off their meds, they're released back into the community. Now there's nobody to really monitor their meds and at least get them back on track. And I'm just wondering what the policy is regarding these sort of assessments and holding for treatment.
There's a whole mental health act that that has criteria for who we're allowed to hold and force treatment on. So without knowing specific, or I don't know the specific case you're discussing, we actually have to follow the Mental Health Act. Otherwise, we're violating people's rights. We do have teams of people in the community that support clients, and some clients don't want to take their meds, and so we support them at where they're at. And based on the act and the specifics of the case, we can't force people to take medication. So, but we do have services in both communities to support people in the community.
I guess my question is, though, once they have been apprehended by police and brought in under the Mental Health Act, isn't there some obligation to ensure that if they're not taking the treatment long-term, that at least they are being held long enough to get them back to an even keel before releasing them back into the community in worse condition than when they were apprehended, which is what I'm currently seeing in the last couple of days with one of our local citizens.
Okay.
We can only hold people for 48 hours. And if they do not meet all of the criteria, there's a huge ombudsman report on this, and we're actually working through all the recommendations. If they do not meet specific requirements, we cannot hold them longer and force treatment on them.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers or questions of the delegation, do we have a motion take a motion for receipt of the presentation? Moved by Director Frisch.
Second.
By Director Evans. Thank you. Anyone in opposition to receipt? Seeing none, call that approved. So item 3, we've got 27 minutes to finish by our noon deadline. So long-term bed requirements, a report dated September 1st, 2020, regarding long-term care bed requirements in the Coast Strathcona area for receipt.
Move receipt.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none. Anyone opposed? Hearing no opposition, the motion is approved. Item 4, the 2019 community grants report dated March 16th, 2020, including the named facility community grant report submissions for 2019 for receipt.
Move receipt.
Thank you, Director Unger and Director Frisch. Discussion? Seeing none. Anyone opposed? Seeing no opposition, motion passes. The summary of projects as of August 31st, 2020. Thank you. Second by. So moved by Director Frisch, seconded by Director Cole Hamilton. And any discussion? Seeing none. Any in opposition? Seeing none, motion passes. The management report.
Move receipt.
Thank you. Discussion? Seeing none. Call a question. Anyone in opposition? Seeing no opposition, motion passes. We have no bylaws and resolutions. We have under new business, Chair Cutler's review of service levels, a letter dated July 31st, 2020 from CRBRD Chair Cutler regarding request that the CSRHD undertake a strategic review of service level needs for receipt. Okay, discussion. Director Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So after receipt, I'd be happy to move that we do make that request of the CSRHD.
Okay. So, any further discussion on receipt? I just want to let everyone know that in the spring with COVID, I had requested of staff to look at options for reducing the requisition. At the time, well, there was no time left to effect a resolution, and the overall impact would be very minor. And so anyway, I talked to both chairs, Kettler from the Comox Valley and Babchuk from North End, or at least from Strathcona, and informed them of the request and the results from our staff. So anyway, that's sort of the bit of the background behind that and where it came from. And I've talked to Chair Kettler since as well. Okay, so on receipt, is there any further discussion? Okay, anyone in opposition? No opposition, so I will declare that receipt motion passes. Subsequent, Director Frisch.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. So I'll move that the Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District undertake a strategic review of service level needs.
Second that.
Okay. Discussion? Director Unger, were you? Oh, wait a minute. I have Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if we could hear from staff regarding what that work would entail.
Chair and directors, in response to the question, it would be similar to what was undertaken by the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board, which all of you should be familiar with the exception of our budget lines are very much more modest with respect to this service. So it may be looking at some of the comments made by your CFO with respect to the management of reserves and such. I'm confident that for this service, we would probably be able to turn around such a review and bring forward options if there are any, or the results of our analysis within a month.
Thanks very much.
Okay. I have Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if staff could indicate a timeline that this could happen in. I don't know whether that needs to be included in the motion. If you have an indication of when this could occur, thank you.
Chair and directors, I think we could accomplish it within a month. Having said that, the implications of the report and whether you take any action would be something that you would initiate through the budget process in the following year. So it will be well in advance of the of your ability to affect change.
Okay, thank you. I see no further speakers on the list. So on the question, do we have the resolution written down somewhere?
Just on here.
Okay, do you want to repeat it and make sure that it is as per Director Frisch's?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the motion is that the Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District direct a review of service level needs.
I missed that one. Russell was.
Would you like me to repeat it?
One more time, please.
That the Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District direct a review of service level needs.
Okay, thank you. Everybody's clear on it? Call a question. Is there anyone in opposition? Seeing none, declare the motion passes. Yes, I know you do, Director Lee, and you are next on the list. I might even turn your mic on.
Okay, now we're logging. So I have a motion. My motion is, in light of the absence of a response to our chair's excellent letter dated March 3rd, 2020, to the Chair of Island Health requesting that the CSRHD receive reinstatement of our pathology services at North Island hospitals and requesting that Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District be excluded from the VICPCC contract. I would request in this motion that this letter be forwarded to the Premier of BC and the Leader of Opposition with copies to our MLAs for a response.
Do I have a seconder?
Director Bissinger, second.
Yes, we have a Director Abram has seconded it. And so we have a motion moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing, oh, there's one hand that's up on the list there. Jake. Okay, Director Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly appreciate the intent of the motion. I am very concerned, though, of the board getting into operational issues versus governance, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So any further speakers?
If I could just clarify.
Just before, is there any further speakers? Director Hillian?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not necessarily opposed to the motion, but I do have a couple of questions about our process of getting some type of resolution for this ongoing discussion. And it seems to me that we haven't been very successful in either articulating the specific concern such that we get a direct response, or there's some challenges on the other end. And for example, our our presenter this morning, who spoke with some expertise on the medical side of the issue, hadn't actually had the opportunity to see the letter that had occasioned the request for the presentation. So again, I'm just wondering if it would be more effective to have some type of small committee engage in a direct discussion with representatives of Highland Health, perhaps including the proponent of the motion, to get a more direct understanding and response so that we could either have satisfaction that some change is forthcoming or that the request is being turned down.
Thank you, Director Hillian. Before I go to Director Lee, there was a letter received a week or so ago from the board chair regarding the lab issue. No. No, not you. You're talking the lab issue one, correct, Director Lee?
Pathology lab.
Yeah, and there was
Labs.
a letter, and I thought it was at the SRD board level that came in the response, but I will try and track that down and find out.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted, in response to Director Hillian's comments and also Dr. Grace's presentation, our board's direction to communicate that we wanted a review of putting back our North Island Hospital pathology labs and removing us from the VICPCC contract was not based on operational issues at all. It was based on our capital investment in these facilities, in the hospital labs themselves and the equipment. And we have every right to ask the government for accountability.
I don't think anyone is questioning.
Yeah,
your
and I
right
don't
to-
think it hurts to elevate this to the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition and our MLAs so that they can let us know where they stand on this issue, particularly if we're going to have an election soon.
Okay, thank you. So debate's closed. There's no, Director Abram.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that the letter, that the motion that Director Lee has made and I've seconded should be accepted by the board, passed, and Director Hillian's excellent suggestions could be a second step, but I think this needs to be the first step. So I hope you'll support the motion.
Okay, thank you, Director Anderson, and then Morin.
Thank you. I echo Director Hillian's comments. This is a complex issue. I understand that there's a capital component. There is very much an operational component, and they go hand in hand. If we built a room in the hospital that technology no longer supported and there was a better way of doing it, we wouldn't complain about it. And I feel like there are some real concerns and there are some very complex issues that are beyond our comprehension. And in light of the presentation today, I wonder if this is the one thing that we want to elevate to the Premier in a whole number of years before we get super clear on this matter. So I think doing some kind of more proactive discussion with a small group of people from the hospital board who want to take this on with some of the Island Health folks locally before elevating to the Premier might, if we go to the Premier, might be more effective, because I can imagine being the Premier and this landing on my desk with a whole bunch of wildly different opinions from different boards that I respect and not really knowing what to do with it. I think if we can go with a little bit more unanimity, it would be a much stronger message. I don't.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I think that a step beforehand would make this stronger.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Anderson. And just to remind people that we already sent a letter to the Premier previously on it.
We did. We need to elevate this.
Anyway, we have a motion that's on the floor. I have a speakers list. Director Morin is next. And then I want to wrap it up because we want to be out of here by noon. So Director Moran.
Thank you, Chair. I was on the list, but my comments were reflected in what Director Hillian and Director Anderson said. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. So on the motion, Jake?
Mr. Chair, the motion moved and seconded is that in light of the lack of response from Island Health requesting reinstatement of pathology services at the North Island hospitals and exclusion from the VIPCC contract, the board directs staff to forward the letter dated March 3rd, 2020 to the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition and requesting a response.
With copies to the local MLAs.
That's part of our process, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So further discussion? Seeing none? Any in opposition? Director Frisch? In opposition? I'm in opposition. So 2 in opposition. Motion.
Kerr. Director Kerr in opposition.
Okay, 3. Any furthers? Any in opposition? Okay.
Yeah, it's like you're on a fishing trip.
We don't need to poll the board. Right now, there's 3 in opposition. You're automatically in favor unless you vote in opposition. And that's under the rules of our meetings. Thank you. So any further, no one else in opposition? Declare the motion passed.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. No addendum. Termination's been called. Seconder? Second. Thank you. Anyone in opposition? Hearing none. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll declare the meeting closed and terminated. And thank everyone for their participation today. I know there was some competing issues with the Minister of Health as well as with Island Health's COVID updates. So appreciate it and thank you very much.